Malcolm Training Tutorials. Hedgehog Linux. Installing Hedgehog Linux. In this video, you will learn how to obtain the installation ISO, how to flash the installation ISO to a USB flash drive or bootable medium, how to install Hedgehog Linux onto a system intended to serve as a network sensor.
Any network traffic analysis or security monitoring system is only as good as the network traffic it observes. While Malcolm itself can capture network traffic in a standalone deployment, other scenarios may require multiple capture points at different locations in the network, or it may be desirable to spread the processing workload for network traffic capture across more devices. A network sensor is a device purposed to observe and summarize network traffic and forward that summary to an aggregator for indexing and analysis. Hedgehog Linux is an operating system designed to monitor network interfaces, capture packets to PCAP files, detect file transfers in network traffic and extract and scan those files for threats, and generate and forward Zeek logs, Archime sessions, Suricata alerts, and other information to Malcolm. In other words, installing Hedgehog Linux turns a computer into a dedicated network sensor for use with Malcolm.
With that background information on network sensors, let's learn how to install Hedgehog Linux using the project's installer ISO. These instructions apply to installing Hedgehog Linux on a bare metal system or in a virtual machine environment. That means we're creating a dedicated Hedgehog Linux system or virtual machine. If you install Hedgehog Linux using the ISO, it will replace the existing operating system and format all non-removable storage attached to the system on which it's being installed.
Before we start, a quick note on minimum system requirements. If you try to install Hedgehog Linux without adequate resources, it will run poorly or crash the machine. Hedgehog Linux's minimum system requirements are 8 GB of RAM and 4 CPU cores. However, for an optimal experience, it is recommended to install Hedgehog Linux on a system with 16 GB or more of RAM and 8 or more CPU cores. The machine should also have at least 2 network interface cards, or NICs, one for management and communication with the Malcolm aggregator, and at least one for traffic capture. Users will want as much storage space as possible, preferably solid-state storage, as the amount of PCAP data the sensor can analyze and archive will be limited by available storage.
Step 1. How to obtain the installation ISO. The Hedgehog Linux installation ISO can be downloaded from the Malcolm Releases page on GitHub. The documentation for downloading Hedgehog Linux provides the most up-to-date instructions for obtaining the installation ISO. It is available at sysagov.github.io/Malcolm.
Step 2. How to flash the installation ISO to a USB flash drive or bootable medium. There are many programs which can flash an ISO to USB or other bootable media. CISA does not promote the use of any tool. Use whichever program fits best with your personal workflow or system. For this example, I'll demonstrate Etcher by Balena, which is a free open-source application. Etcher is available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux platforms. I open Etcher and insert my USB stick or bootable medium. Select the first option on the left, Flash from File. This is where I select the source. I navigate to where I saved the ISO file on my computer and select it. Next, I select a target and choose the destination. Having already plugged in my USB thumb drive, I select it from the list. If you have multiple external storage devices connected, make sure to choose the right one. Click Select One. Finally, I click Flash. Your operating system may prompt you for elevated privileges to write directly to the storage device. If so, enter the password for that elevated permission or contact your system administrator for guidance. The program will write the contents of the Hedgehog Linux installation ISO to the storage device. This may take a few minutes depending on the speed of your USB drive. You can track the progress on the left. The status bar will go through 2 passes. The first pass is to write, and the second pass validates that the data was written correctly. Once successful, the program indicates Flash completed. You may now close the program. The ISO has been written to your bootable medium.
How to install Hedgehog Linux onto a system intended to serve as a network sensor. Connect the USB thumb drive or bootable medium to the machine onto which you would like to install Hedgehog Linux. Instead of booting to the regular hard drive, boot to the USB or medium containing the ISO. Most systems will require you to press a function key, such as F10 or F11, to boot a removable device. This video presents a general use case, but the method for booting your system from a removable device depends on the manufacturer. Consult the documentation provided by your manufacturer or your system administrator if you are unsure how to boot from an external storage device.
The next step is a critical step. Remember, if you install the Hedgehog ISO, it will overwrite everything else on that device and give its resources and storage to Hedgehog Linux. Do not install the Hedgehog ISO unless you want that device to be a dedicated Hedgehog sensor. If you are installing the Hedgehog Linux ISO within a virtual machine, the Hedgehog Linux installer will not overwrite your host system's hard disk, as Hedgehog Linux will be installed onto the virtual block storage device assigned to the virtual machine. From the boot menu, select Install Hedgehog Linux. For installations on hardware, most users will select Quick Install, which will select default settings. For installations in a virtual machine, select Virtual Machine Single Partition Quick Install. The installer will begin work, occasionally prompting you with questions. You will be prompted to set the root password. This is the administrator password for the Hedgehog operating system. You will be asked to type this twice. Next, you will be prompted to create a sensor service account password. This user password should be different than the administrator password entered a few moments ago.
After the passwords are entered, it will start up the partitioner to begin installing. This will take 5 to 10 minutes depending on the speed of your machine. Towards the end of the installation, you will be prompted with a few more questions. The first question is about whether your network uses IPv6 networking. For certain networks, such as industrial control systems networks, it is best practice to turn off IPv6. Other networks, such as IT networks, may use IPv6. It just depends on your network configuration whether you want to disable it. Work with your system administrator if you are unsure. This setting will not impact Hedgehog's ability to analyze IPv6 traffic. It simply determines whether Hedgehog Linux itself will be reachable over IPv6. The next question is security related. It asks, automatically log into the GUI session? For example, if your machine is in a secure environment and you want Hedgehog to run without typing in the username and password, then select Yes. It will automatically log you in when the system boots. If you want it to require the username and password that you created a moment ago, then select No. The next question is similar. Should the GUI session be locked due to inactivity? Select Yes if you would like Hedgehog to blank its screen and lock its desktop after a few minutes of inactivity. Select No if you want the Hedgehog service user account to remain continuously logged in.
The next question is display the standard mandatory DoD notice and consent banner. This question is only applicable to U.S. government installations. Federal law requires that U.S. government-owned systems display a banner with a privacy statement. If you're installing Hedgehog on a non-government system, select No. If you are installing Hedgehog on a U.S. government-owned system, select Yes.
The last question is a security-based question. Allow SSH password authentication? Hedgehog Linux can be remotely accessed by other machines for management using the Secure Shell protocol. As a security best practice, password authentication over SSH is disabled by default, as it prevents an unauthorized user from attempting to gain remote access to the system using brute force password guessing. Should your specific requirements require SSH authentication using a password, you may select Yes. That wraps up the installation questions. The system will complete the installation. Then it will reboot. You may now disconnect the removable installation medium. It may take a few minutes for Hedgehog Linux to boot the first time depending upon your system. Check out the description section for links to the Malcolm GitHub site, a Malcolm discussion forum, and more.